My fiancé, the best man, groomsmen, and I have known each other since we were kids. We collectively met between 6th and 7th grade and have been running around in the same friend group ever since. The group has grown and shrunk over the years, but a small core of us has remained extremely close. Recently, my fiancé's best man Jay, 30M, has been making jokes when we're hanging out about the two of us dating that have now escalated. Admittedly, when I met Jay in 6th grade, I had the hugest crush on him, and everyone knew. I was much taller than average for a girl at that age, and he was one of 2 guys in the entire school as tall as me. That, however, is where the story ends. I had one hell of an awkward phase in middle school, and he was very clear from the start that he was not into it. Post-awkward phase, as friends and adults, it was something we constantly joked about but never seriously, since everything between us had always been platonic. This joke about me being rejected by him has recently turned into how he dated me first whenever my fiancé and I are around. Despite the inaccuracy and an increase in its frequency, everything has remained pretty lighthearted in context, and while annoying, it is something I have been able to brush off or quickly rebut. This escalated over the weekend when 2 of my fiancé's groomsmen were over hanging out with my fiancé and me. The wedding was brought up, and after a concerning look between the two, they mentioned something that had happened with Jay they thought we should know about. Apparently, Jay had been telling them stories he was considering for his best man speech, with the main one centering around how I had been shared around and had made my way through the entire friend group. While they kept what was explicitly said fairly vague out of respect for me, they were clear it crossed the line and insinuated I had slept with the entirety of the group attending the wedding. They were very clear with Jay that he could not say anything like this in his speech. Jay responded with an I know, stating that I had already made it clear my maid of honor would be proofreading all speeches prior to the wedding, so he wouldn't be able to get away with it anyway. However, he ended the conversation by saying something along the lines of, "But what if I could," leaving the possibility open. Of all the groomsmen in the party, so 6 including Jay, these 2 were the only ones in this core friend group, and the only ones I had any sort of history with that could potentially be notable. It was all prior to high school and very innocent. One, I went on my first movie date with, where our parents had to drop each of us off because we couldn't drive, and picked us up afterward. The other was the classic first 6-month relationship in middle school, where it took 6 weeks to muster up enough courage to hug each other between classes in the hallway. Sure, we made out and very middle school level things happened, but this is something we've all laughed about now for over a decade. I wasn't the only girl in this larger friend group, and throughout the years, this was something that happened pretty frequently. Because we grew up in a smaller area, overlap happened like this regularly in every group and even more so as we went through high school. My fiancé is the only one I have seriously dated or had any sort of intimate relationship with in this friend group. We had an on-again, off-again relationship throughout high school that ended for a bit once I moved out of state for college, but we remained close friends and eventually reconnected when I moved back in 2019. We started dating in 2021 and engaged in 2023. He's the only one in all of this I have ever slept with, who has seen all of me, and so on, making this situation even more odd and off-putting. Jay and I have been close friends since high school. When my fiancé was in a toxic relationship that isolated him from Jay after I had left for college, Jay would reach out to me for advice on school, girls, relationships, and more. He had always been our number one supporter, advocating for my fiancé and me to reconcile our relationship throughout college and into adulthood. He even took a bit of credit and would throw around an "I told you so" here and there when we eventually did reconnect. I'm not sure how to handle this. I could write an additional post about how frustrated, confused, wronged, and uncomfortable I feel, all of which I plan to discuss in more detail with my fiancé after sitting on the issue for a bit longer. We've all talked about it, recognizing the way Jay is framing things as wrong, but my fiancé and the groomsmen are able to brush it off in a way I feel like I can't. I don't know how to move forward from this or what to do next. Edit. Fiancé and I aren't getting married until the end of next summer, so many of the conversations about toasts and speeches have been more theoretical, except that a few have asked for the opportunity to give a toast, including the best man. We have loosely included this information in the Save the Dates, on the website, and in other prints. Fiancé and the best man have been best friends since kindergarten. They were neighbors and inseparable until they each went their separate ways for college. My fiancé's parents basically raised him alongside the best man. Jay has strictly only ever expressed platonic feelings for me. Even when both single or alone together, we have only ever acted as friends towards each other after the embarrassing early middle school crush I had. Update 1. First, I wanted to thank those who were clear and honest about how alarming the situation was from their perspective. When posting, I was still processing various feelings about the matter, and still am, which not only limited my ability to really look at the situation from a different perspective but also left me in a state of paralysis of what to do next, both long and short term. Since posting, I have spoken in further detail to both my fiancé and one of the other groomsmen involved. I also confided in my maid of honor about the situation for an additional perspective outside of this specific friend group. After these conversations and reading through all comments on the original post, I've come to realize the significance of a few key details. Jay has a deep-rooted superiority complex. He always has, and it is something many in our friend group have become accustomed to. He has always been the type who seemed to believe he was the standout among his friends, whether that be through education, athletics, his career, or with women. Jay has also always been a bit egocentric, and a lack of accountability or consequences for his actions has been growing for some time now. Despite it almost always being unintentional, he more often than not is oblivious to the inconveniences and harm he causes others, as long as it is beneficial to his personal ego. This is about jealousy from a few different angles, but not about me specifically. When looking at the full picture, this escalation feels like a continued attempt to knock my fiancé down for reaching that next stage in life. Whether that is because my fiancé has reached it before him or has moved onward without him, I cannot say for sure. Jay has issues with misogyny that have also been escalating in tandem with everything else. His lack of respect for the women he has dated has also seemed to increase. Much of the personal tension between him and me recently pertains to his perspective on women, which has begun to veer into a more disrespectful realm, alluding to an increased belief that, due to their gender alone, women are inferior. The good friend he was to me over the years, who was always kind and supportive, who never overstepped boundaries and was always there when needed, can exist alongside the above information. They are not mutually exclusive. Life happens, and people grow, sometimes in opposite directions. I spoke in depth with one of the groomsmen to gain further transparency on the situation and what was explicitly said. He acknowledged that the conversation initially centered around the excitement they had for the wedding, with Jay clearly stating he wanted to give my fiancé and me the best wedding and experience possible. The conversation evolved, and Jay mentioned looking for icebreakers for his toast and began bouncing a variety of distasteful jokes that focused more on the expense of my fiancé than anything else. Then the idea was proposed of explicitly stating that my being passed around the friend group was how they all remained relatively close since middle school and high school. Jay was immediately shut down by the other groomsmen, told to know his audience, and also recognized he was openly alluding to things that were untrue and that could have an extremely negative impact on me personally. The conversation stopped shortly after this, and the groomsmen, without context of how this issue had been escalating, chalked it up to a one-off situation with Jay acting full of himself in the moment. Fiancé and I are the first of our cohort to get married and have a full-blown wedding with a ceremony and reception. These comments did not start escalating until after our engagement roughly 1 year ago, following Jay's breakup with his long-term girlfriend. Jay has never made comments like this to me or my fiancé privately or when it is just the three of us together. Any scenario where this has been an issue has been in an environment that involved others, and mostly others that are not a part of this cohort from middle school. This solidified the above bullet points as the main factors as to why Jay acted in this way, from my perspective. So, what's next? As mentioned in my original post, I spoke with fiancé in detail about the situation and how I was feeling. When all of this had been brought to our attention a few days prior, in an attempt to preserve myself in the moment, I brushed it off more so than I probably should have. I do not blame fiancé for not having any immediate or strong reaction in the moment because I had avoided one myself. I think it's important to note that Jay is not a day-to-day character in our lives. While he travels frequently for work that brings him to our area, we live states apart. He has not lived in the same area as me or my fiancé since high school. Much of this evolution with his personality has happened in the last few years as well. I recognize this is not an excuse for the lack of accountability on our part, but felt it added important context that this was not something that was observed and ignored daily but one that has slowly been recognized over time, since we maybe see him 4 times a year at most. Fiancé was extremely open in conversation, immediately bringing up the idea of talking to Jay but admitting to not viewing this as anything more than Jay just being Jay and that he was all talk. At this point, we had only discussed how Jay had continually escalated the situation and how uncomfortable I had now become from this. The lack of accountability fiancé had for Jay's actions definitely hurt, but then I recalled a commenter who had asked if I still considered Jay a friend because he actually was, or because that was how it has always been. To sum up what turned into a lengthier and much more productive conversation with fiancé, I told him that while I recognized his friendship with Jay was something that had always been a part of his life, I personally did not want to be friends with him anymore after this. I brought to fiancé's attention that while the scenario was explicitly about me, and attacking the integrity and character of a 12-year-old girl, every action or usage of the scenario was used against him to invalidate his accomplishments of getting married or make him come off as less than. I told fiancé it was up to him on how he handles his conversation with Jay, but regardless, the disrespect Jay had shown me in this was a clear statement of what he thought of our own personal friendship. I firmly believe it is not my place to force how my fiancé handles his own personal relationship with Jay in this. All of this was deeply taken to heart, and you could tell that fiancé had started coming to his own realizations as the conversation progressed. He recognized that if the roles were reversed, or if it had been any one of my bridesmaids slandering me in any way, He would be firmly advocating for me to reevaluate my friendship with them. Fiancé asked for a few days to digest the information himself and reflect on what he wants to say to Jay. He asked if it would be acceptable for him to bring up that I no longer wanted to be friends with Jay personally, and I said yes. I was clear that if Jay wanted to talk with me following their conversation as well, it would need to be the three of us and not a personal conversation. I'm still evaluating how to approach the speeches at our wedding. For now, I reserve the right with my fiancé to omit Jay from giving a speech and have my fiancé choose another groomsman to do so in his place, potentially canceling the speeches altogether. If Jay is allowed to give a toast, we agreed to tell the DJ to cut the mic if need be, all of which he agreed with. There is still plenty of time for the situation to develop, and for potential future updates, but I wanted to again thank those who emphasized the seriousness of this issue, gave their honest input and advice on how to handle the situation, and provided perspective on what they believe should be done next. When originally posting, I was still in a state of shock, trying to accept the situation as it had unfolded. Your responses constructively pushed me into the reality of what was happening and what I was feeling.